I'm Mark Halprin.
And I'm John Heilemann. And with all due respect to Donald Trump, as we head into this Thanksgiving holiday, we were hoping for a quiet Monday. Happy National Cashew Day, sports fans. And no, sadly, that is not a setup to a D's Nuts joke. On the show tonight, Donald Trump's flaps and Bernie Sanders' slaps. But first, Ben Carson's gaps. There are two new national polls out showing Dr. Carson is no longer sharing frontrunner status with the Donald, who is way out ahead of the Republican presidential field by a whopping margin, double digits all over the place. According to the numbers from Fox News, Carson is down 5 points from last month, with Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz closing fast. The Carson slump was even more significant in some new early state online polls. In a CBS YouGov Iowa survey, Carson has fallen all the way to third with 19%, while Ted Cruz has cruised past him up to 21%. And the CBS YouGov New Hampshire numbers show Carson is tied with Cruz in third place with just 10%, while this time it's Rubio in second place with 13%. And he's up 6 points since last month. Carson also saw his support fall in South Carolina. So, Mark, there are several interesting storylines in these polls. I ask you, my friend, which one strikes you as the most significant?
Well, there are a lot of people in the establishment and in the media who want to just say, that's it for Carson, he's done. I think that's premature to write him off. He can have a second act the way many other people have had second acts. But the big news here is Trump. Trump is so far ahead that people in some of the establishment campaigns now are saying, you know what? Maybe we can finally say he's not coming back down to earth. We're going to have to beat him after he wins some early contests when one of us can get him one-on-one.
Well, I'm going to come back to the point about Carson in a second, but since you made the point about Trump, let's just put up these numbers, this number. It's a key number here to why Trump is doing well and to the point I'm going to make about Carson, which is that among Republicans right now, terrorism in the wake of Paris has shot through the ceiling. We can see this number on our big board up here. 42% of Republicans say terrorism now the top issue, with the economy lagging now at 29%. Donald Trump's strongman persona in this new era helping him a lot. And I would say, though I'm not going to let you paint me as an establishmentarian who's saying Ben Carson is dead, I think that his weakness on foreign policy has finally caught up with him. And in the same way it's helping Trump to be strong, it's hurting Carson to be weak in that area in this environment.
In the national context, even though it's not a national race, establishing primacy as Trump alternative for Cruz and Rubio is key. And right now, if you look at the polls we just talked about and some of the other recent ones, there's a bit of a checkerboard thing. There are places where Cruz looks stronger, places where Rubio looks stronger. That contest, the Trump alternative contest right now between those two guys, may be the biggest thing in a Republican race, with Trump as a constant way ahead. But again, more difficult at least for him to beat somebody when it gets down to one-on-one, if it does.
Right.
All right. The aforementioned Mr. Trump is defending himself right now from so many flaps, we could not fit all of them on our giant wall. The Donald's been taking heat for saying he saw people in New Jersey cheering right after the 9/11 attacks, despite an absence of evidence that that happened. He's under fire for his apparent openness to a federal registry for Muslims, and for his calls for the surveillance of mosques in America, and for his unabashed support for waterboarding. This weekend, he also backed some of his supporters who roughed up a Black Lives Matter protester at one of his rallies, and he tweeted some questionable data about African-American violence. All right, so, John, this is not the first time Mr. Trump has been embroiled in a lot of flaps. Will any of these new ones trip him up, or will they all turn out to be just like the others, some stuff that he overcomes in the end?
Well, first, let's just say a couple things that are clear, right? The first is it's now clear that Trump has clarified his position on the Muslim registry thing, which is that he is totally not ruling it out. He says it's completely within the realm of the possible. The second thing is this New Jersey story is totally bogus. He's either just making it up or he's fallen for an internet rumor. To answer your question directly, Mark, I don't think any one of these things is going to bring Donald Trump down. We've learned too much about his strength over the past few months to ever say that. But I do think that if anything ever brings Donald Trump down, it's going to look like this in one respect. It's going to be a bunch of things and not just one. It's not a silver bullet. It's going to be a range of things. These probably aren't them, but this is the way it could happen.
It's Freaky Friday. We've reversed roles because I believe that the registry could be the thing that eventually brings him down. It's so controversial. It's so out of step with what a lot of Americans believe. He's been squirrely about it, and if you take his words literally, he's supporting it, or at least not ruling it out, I should say. But this is the kind of thing, and maybe this thing, when voters get serious, I think could rule him out. I want to show everybody one other thing. John Kasich's Super PAC has got a web video up now. It's intriguing. It's not a TV ad, but it's intriguing because it goes at the mockery of Trump that a lot of people in the establishment think in the end is what's going to cause him to come down.
He's not a war hero.
He's a war hero.
He's a war hero.
5.5 years.
He's a war hero because he was captured.
If Ivanka weren't my daughter, perhaps I'd be dating her. You know?
Stop it! Oh, it's so weird.
I have a great relationship with the blacks. I've always had a great relationship with the blacks.
The blacks.
Well, I just don't respect her as a journalist. You know, you could see there was blood coming out of her eyes, blood coming out of her wherever. Somebody's doing the raping, Don. I mean, you know, somebody's doing the, you're saying it's women being raped. Well, who's doing the raping?
The belt moves this way. It moves this way.
How stupid are the people of Iowa?
John, the reason I wanted everybody to see that is because I think in the end, if Trump is going to be brought down, it's going to be brought down by the establishment convincing the voters he just doesn't have the right temperament, the right tone to be commander-in-chief in these troubled times and to undermine his strongman persona with mockery.
Right. And look, I think this just goes to the point I was trying to make at the outset here, which is that it is going to be the accumulation of stuff, not one thing, but everything, the weight of it all. I do find that ad a little odd in the sense that those are all things that that the controversy, like the greatest hits of the highlight controversy reel, and they're all things that didn't really seem to dent him before. But again, if you're betting on the notion that it's the cumulative effect, there's some sense in that kind of an approach. All right. As he has been for weeks now, Marco Rubio is a man on the rise and trying to keep the big mo. His campaign is going on the air this week with its first TV ad, a 30-second spot that Rubio's people say will be seen nationally. The singular focus of that ad, that would be ISIS.
This is a civilizational struggle between the values of freedom and liberty and radical Islamic terror. What happened in Paris could happen here. There is no middle ground. These aren't disgruntled or disempowered people. These are radical terrorists who want to kill us because we let women drive, because we let girls go to school. I'm Marco Rubio. I approve this message because there can be no arrangement or negotiation. Either they win or we do.
All right, Mark, so you got the black backdrop, you got the somber music, ominous. It's a pretty striking ad, whatever you think of it. So my question for you is, why this topic for this guy in this way at this time?
Well, even pre-Paris, we both know that national security and ISIS were a big issue for Republican nominating voters. Marco Rubio needs to be a national security candidate, and he needs to go right into convincing people, looking Republicans in the eye and saying, I'm 42, but I'm ready to be commander-in-chief. And I think maybe that's a little too somber and a little too negative, but it's an ad he has to do, and I think he's smart to lead with it because that's what he wants to be known as, the guy who's ready to do the job.
I think this is one of those things, though. I think, Chris Matthews, I think, talks about, some old political adage about hanging a lantern on your troubles. That is kind of what Rubio's doing here, because when you see him in that setting, it does highlight how young he looks. He does not emanate gravitas. So I think you're right in the sense that I can understand why they want to take on this problem, and obviously this is the moment to do it if you're going to take it on. But I'm not sure that ad 100% works.
Well, he's not going to age all of a sudden, so he's got to deal with what he's got, which is he's as old as he is.
Yeah, all right. Now we're going to shift our focus to the Democratic side of the presidential race. That's Hillary Clinton, who rolled out new tax credit proposals on the campaign trail this weekend. And once again, within hours, the Bernie Sanders campaign went right into attack mode. In a statement, Sanders spokesman Michael Briggs called Clinton's tax plans, quote, tentative half steps that sound like Republican light. In the last week alone, the Sanders camp has knocked Clinton for not going far enough on a range of policies, from health care to taxes to family leave. But, Mark, I have to ask you, we're feeling the burn, but is the burn landing any of those blows?
My gut is that they're not. The Clinton campaign is being very aggressive, and while Sanders is making some good points on the merits, and his campaign is in these press releases, it's very hard now, given the head of steam she has up, for the campaign to put a dent into it. I still think Sanders himself has to do it, and he can't just wait for debates to do it. He's got to drive a message every day if he's going to slow her down.
There's a key word there that you're using, which is he. He's got to drive the message. Right now, the sharpest attacks and contrasts are coming out of Michael Briggs' mouth or other people in the Sanders campaign's mouth. Bernie Sanders is the only person who can be an effective and credible messenger if he's going to do contrast with Hillary Clinton. He can't delegate that to his campaign. And I think the biggest weakness he has right now in terms of pursuing this strategy is that it feels like he's outsourcing the criticism to his aides.
Yeah, they give credit to the Clinton campaign. They understand how politics works. They understand messaging. They're being very nimble about talking about tax cuts, trying to outflank him from the left sometimes, the right other times. Yep. Very effective. And again, he's behind. He needs to catch up. All right, up next, Speaker Paul Ryan's Capitol Hill hot streak and what our latest poll of Americans says about the new Star Wars film. We're back in 60 seconds. President Obama and Secretary of State John Kerry have both taken a lot of criticism for the tone, substance, and emphasis of their public statements about the Islamic State since the Paris attacks. However, neither is changing his tone very much. This morning, on the Today Show, Kerry said ISIS is, quote, not 10 feet tall. And at his final press conference in Malaysia over the weekend, the president continued to downplay the terrorist group's strength, calling them, quote, killers with good social media.
We do not succumb to fear. That's the primary power that these terrorists have over us. They cannot strike a mortal blow against the United States or against France or against a country like Malaysia. But they can make people fearful, and that's understandable.
John, what gives? There's been all this criticism of the president and of the Secretary of State, and yet they continue to take pretty much the same tone, have the same emphasis. Why?
Well, you remember, Mark, back during the BP oil spill when President Obama said, you know, I can stomp my feet, I can emote, I can get emotional about all this. That's not going to do anything to plug the damn hole. I think the attitude is very much the same here. I think the president and Secretary Kerry look at the country. They think it's dangerous that people are panicking here, and they are trying to adopt a hyper-rational tone. Everything they're saying is true. It really is actually true, pretty much every word that's come out of their mouth. They are not they do not want to stir up more frenzy and more fear here. They're trying to calm people down. You might not like that, but that's what they're going out trying to do, I think.
I'm not sure everything they've said has been strictly true, but I have been struck since the president's first press conference in Turkey at how many Democrats, including some who are typically very supportive of the president, who think this is all wrong. Some have called it the worst moment of his presidency, and I don't get why they don't at least tweak their level of dismissiveness over ISIS and pessimism in some ways and optimism in others. That just seems off-key.
Yeah. I mean, it's not been perfect by any means, but at least I'm trying to see what they're trying to do and trying to get inside their heads of how they're thinking, because they're not dumb guys. Anyway, we're going to be talking about that topic a little bit later with someone who can hopefully enlighten both of us, our White House correspondent, Margaret Talleb. Meanwhile, just when you thought things couldn't get any worse in Washington, they didn't. It's only been 3 weeks since Paul Ryan took over as Speaker of the House, but he's already averted a government shutdown, passed a big highway funding bill, and has taken the lead on the Syrian refugee issue. Mark, my question for you is whether Ryan's strong start as Speaker, whether that's a honeymoon phase or is this the new normal?
I don't want to curse the guy, but I think it's the new normal. I think he'll get all the way through the election. He's got Democrats respecting him and dealing with him. He's spending the time doing the kind of things you need to do to get everybody to feel like they're at least invested in the process. And while I don't know that this will yield any huge accomplishments, it is changing the tone. It is having Washington function better. And I think you can credit Paul Ryan having thought through the way he wanted to do the job and the way it would work.
Well, I think we'll have the answer to this question, I think. I mean, there's no doubt it's different. I don't know if it's the new normal. Things have changed in some substantial way, partly because of Ryan, partly because of the dynamics. But the question is, will we be looking at a government shutdown threat again in December? When that talk starts again, what does Ryan do? That'll tell you we'll have our answer then about honeymoon or new normal. I could easily see us being back to where we were before, but I hope not.
I think he's got a better chance to deal with it than Boehner did, simply because, again, Democrats are more invested in his success in a way that they weren't for Boehner.
Well, and I think also the right feels he's more one of them than they ever did John Boehner. That's also true. Both sides.
Yep. Okay. We've talked a lot at the end of last week about our latest Bloomberg Politics national poll, but we saved a little nugget for now. We asked people to pick from a list of upcoming events and tell us which one they were looking the most forward to. And the survey says 28% of you are most excited about the Super Bowl, 20% the Iowa caucuses, more than the 19% who said Star Wars. That is crazy. And in last place, 9% say the NCAA men's basketball tournament, a.k.a. March Madness. John, I'm assuming you're surprised by that result, but I'm wondering why you think that is and which event you're looking most forward to.
I can only come up with one possible answer for this because I'm a really political guy, but I got to tell you, between the Iowa caucuses and the new Star Wars movie, it's all about Star Wars for me. And I swear, the only answer I can come up with is that our survey respondents are high, and high on some substance that if I could get a hold of it, I would. I can't understand it. You got to be nuts to be looking forward to the caucuses more than both March Madness and the the Star Wars movie. That's crazy.
Trump trumps Harrison Ford. It's that simple.
It's incomprehensible. Do you have an explanation for this that makes more sense than, like, I think everyone's on drugs?
Trump get people excited about this election. They've got people interested. It's all I can think of. Mr. Trump will tell you, people like him. They like watching
Which one of those four things are you looking forward to most?
Star Wars. Not even close.
Right, Star Wars. Not even close. Okay. All right. As long as we're in agreement about that, we're all good. Coming up, we will put Hillary Clinton's campaign under ye old microscopy with one of the best Democratic minds in the business. We'll be right back.
Our first guest tonight is former White House Communications Director for Barack Obama and a top Democratic strategist, Anita Dunn, who joins us from Washington. Anita, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me on.
Great to be here. So, Hillary Clinton, as a general election candidate today, what does she have going for her? And if you were working for the campaign, what would worry you about her general election prospects?
I think that in the last month, you've seen Hillary Clinton as a candidate who's really found her voice. I think if you watch the South Carolina Forum, if you watch the most recent debate, if you watched her speech last week, in her interviews, she is a candidate who increasingly is sounding confident, and because she sounds confident, she sounds more presidential every day. And I think when you talk to people, there's no question about her qualifications, and that what you're starting to see now is you're starting to see a candidate who's really communicating why she wants the job. So I feel she's had a very good stretch here, and that every day she seems a little more comfortable with the role of presidential candidate. So.
You didn't cite her weaknesses.
Now, what would I worry about? You asked what I would worry about.
Yeah, what would you worry about? But I mean, there are state and national polls that show her behind or even with a lot of the Republicans who are in their own contested contests. So do you think those polls aren't accurate, or you think she's actually behind Republicans at this point?
Well, I think that one of the things I wouldn't worry about if I were working for her campaign would be general election polls that were taken in November 2015 for a general election that's being held in November 2016. Right now, you still have a kind of dual-track process going on. You have Hillary Clinton and a bit of a referendum on her, and that's never a great situation. And then on the Republican field, you have some candidates who are not as defined as she is and who have a very intense Republican primary going on with a lot of enthusiasm going on that side for change. So right now you've got two parallel tracks, and pitting those two against each other right now I don't think is an accurate read, because at the end of the day, this election will be much more of a choice than some elections have been in the past. I think that both parties are setting up very stark choices on economic policy, on foreign policy. So I don't worry as much about the polls. If I'm Hillary Clinton's campaign, I worry about the things I don't control. The economy, everything going on in the world. Those are all the kinds of things that, particularly when you're running to follow a president, same party that you are, that so-called third term piece of this would be something that I don't control, but I'd worry about.
Anita, it's clear the reason we talk about the general election, and forget about the head-to-head matchups, is that she's already starting to look towards the general election in terms of how she's running her campaign and so on. If you were working for her and you knew that there were a couple things that are potential areas of vulnerability, One is that her honest and trustworthy numbers among all Americans are not that great. And another is there's a lot of concern about whether she will be able to generate the requisite enthusiasm among the coalition of the ascendant, and particularly millennial voters, young voters. Which of those do you think is a bigger vulnerability, the honest and trustworthy stuff or the enthusiasm piece?
I think it's the enthusiasm piece is one that's always hard to generate when you control the White House already, because you don't get as strong a change component. Now, one of the things that helps mitigate against that for Hillary Clinton is the excitement around electing a historic candidacy, the first woman to be elected president if she's the party's nominee. And so I think that can help with the enthusiasm. Trust and confidence are things you have to earn from the American people. And you earn them from the American people by the kind of campaign you run, by the priorities you choose, and by their kind of sizing you up every day and sizing you up against your opponent. So I think that the enthusiasm piece is one that's just a challenge whenever you're fighting to hold on to something as opposed to fighting to change something. I think that if you look at her rhetoric, though, over the last month, she has started using more change rhetoric than she had in the past, and she obviously is working to address those issues.
Anita, let me ask you the question directly about enthusiasm, right? You work for Barack Obama. You're also a woman. Do you think that Hillary Clinton?
That is undeniable.
Do you think that Hillary Clinton's historic, the nature of her candidacy, will she be able to engender the kind of enthusiasm that among women that Barack Obama did among African Americans?
No, it's a great question, which we don't know the answer to yet, and we won't know for a while. But I think that certainly for a generation of women, Hillary Clinton's story and the things she's talking about really resonate, and the idea of having a woman in the White House is very exciting. So I think that is something that you're not seeing a lot of right now because you are a year out. But I think that as the campaign goes on, I fully expect women will get very excited about this candidacy. You're not going to see the same percentages that you saw in the African American community for Barack Obama with women, because, but at the same time, I think you will see. I think you'll start to see some real excitement here, and you already do on the campaign trail.
Anita, we've got less than a minute, so one or two sentences. Who will the Republican nominee be, and why?
I don't know. So that's one sentence. You guys
Who do you
tell
think
me.
Who do you think the three most likely are right now?
You'd have to go with the front runner, Donald Trump, who has shown an amazing ability to survive and even thrive. It's a scary prospect for a lot of people, me included. Obviously, Senator Rubio seems to be gaining a lot of steam, and I think I'd have to put Senator Cruz in there as well.
All right.
Anita, that's a good list. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. We'll have you back again soon, I'm sure. Up next, the outside group supporting Senator Ted Cruz are sitting on tens of millions of dollars in cash. We'll talk more about that right after this.
Joining us now is Republican strategist Kellyanne Conway. She's now running one of the super PACs supporting Ted Cruz's campaign to be the Republican nominee and eventually the President of the United States. Kellyanne, it's good to see you.
Thank you for having me, John.
So, Ted Cruz suddenly on the move in Iowa. Explain to me what you think is happening there.
What's happening is voters are starting to coalesce around an outsider with insider experience, an outsider who knows his way around Washington, D.C., who's trusted in the evangelical community. Even in 2012, where folks say evangelical turnout was down, particularly in the general election, about 57% of the caucus voters were evangelical. So that's a very strong community there. He's been in the churches. He's got a great grassroots team. And I think on the super PAC side, we're just trying to support what the senator is doing, what we see him doing publicly.
Sure. But you think, I mean, a lot of people, the conventional wisdom right now is very much, there's a lot of good conventional wisdom out there for Ted Cruz right now. And part of it is that in this moment, post-Paris, that Ben Carson's foreign policy weaknesses, shall we say, have actually cost him in an appreciable way in this last week, and that is what we're seeing. In addition to Senator Cruz's strength, that's part of the dynamic that's playing out in that state. Do you think that's basically right?
I think that's part of it, John, and a very smart person observed to me in September when I said, Well, you know, people eventually are going to have to say, can I picture so-and-so as my commander-in-chief? Fill in the blank here. And maybe with Dr. Carson, they'll say, I really can't picture as my commander-in-chief. And that smart person said, well, his people can picture him that way. And there's something to that. But there's no question that the tenor and the content of the race have changed. I also think with the sort of demise, if you will, of the governors, this whole governor model, we need a governor, we need a governor. And I said to myself, where did that come from? And then I remembered the governor said we need a governor. Somehow Washington experience, just a little bit of it, so that you're not a lifer, has somehow buoyed Senators Rubio and Cruz, that they are in these intelligence briefings. They understand what's going on. They're each of them is one of 100 men and women who vote on these things, and that does keep you within the aura of commander-in-chief.
Yep.
Kellyanne Conway, the Cruz super PACs are organized in an unusual way. It's a cluster of different groups doing different things, largely funded by different families or other donors. How's that working, and what's the logic behind it?
It's working very well, Mark. The logic behind it was that you had different families and individuals who were in support of Senator Cruz and his aspiration to be the Republican nominee and president of the United States, and they decided they'll all be under the umbrella of Keep the Promise, but they would have different numbers for each of their super PACs, so that if somebody has a priority on digital, somebody has a priority on broadcast and cable, somebody believes very much in the ground game. It's really different of tactics, but we coordinate constantly. We fly around to meet each other. We talk regularly. And I think what we're trying to do, Mark, is not be duplicative. We find a lot of waste, particularly in super PACs, if you're not careful about duplicating resources and duplicating efforts. My going philosophy is that it's the old saw that the fastest way to have a small fortune, make a small fortune, is to have a very large one and waste most of it. So we're trying to avoid that.
One of the super PACs has got troops on the ground in Iowa. Our colleague Steve Yacino reporting now people going onto the ground in South Carolina. Some are skeptical that super PACs can do the so-called ground game, field organizing and voter contact. What's your view of how valuable that is and how possible it is for a super PAC to do that on behalf of a candidate?
It's possible, and I actually think it's prudent to do that on behalf of a candidate. Not the way the campaign can do it. Let's face it, a super PAC is not a campaign. But the way we've tried to organize Keep the Promise One is at a mini, mini, mini campaign, in that we've invested in people as well as eventually running broadcast and cable ads. Why have we done that? Because we find there are many different ways to touch the voter. You can touch the voter through text messaging, phone banking, digital, broadcast, cable, but also organizing on the ground. And I think organizing on the ground is very much in keeping with who Senator Cruz is. The only people angry at Ted Cruz when he shows up in an event are the fire marshals, because these crowds spill over into the outside and you have to open more doors. Now, I know in the past, Mark, and frankly in the present, there are super PACs that seem to exist almost solely to collect the money and run ad after ad after ad after ad. We're trying not to do that, and you see what's happened. I just read John Kasich's super PAC has run $5.4 million of ads just in New Hampshire. He's at 9%. We've run $0 of ads in New Hampshire. We're at 9%. Right to Rise, 19.3 million. And I think the effect, the intent there was to have Governor Jeb Bush's poll numbers move, and they did, just in the wrong direction. So we're being patient. We're built for the long haul. Have to have ground troops there to organize folks to get out to the polls. We know, as Senator Cruz often says, that many very conservative Tea Parties, evangelicals, stayed home in the past because they felt uninspired. We want to make sure that we can do our part in changing that.
I want to talk to you about the other two people. Anita Dunn, who was just on, said that her three likeliest nominees, Donald Trump, Ted Cruz, and Marco Rubio, in no particular order. I want to talk to you about both of those two potential rivals. I think a lot of people think that's the top tier now, right? So one of the premises of the Cruz approach has been that eventually the two real outsider candidates and the two frontrunners for a long time, Trump and Carson, would fade away. Maybe we're seeing Carson start to fade away now. We'll see. Trump not fading at all, stronger than ever.
Yes.
So is there a way for Ted Cruz to win even his bracket, let alone the nomination itself, unless something happens that we haven't seen so far with Donald Trump? And if so, what is that thing?
John, yes, I am much more realistic than other people who preface almost every conversation with, when Trump and Carson fade away, or after Trump and Carson are gone. Folks, when and how does that happen? We've been having this conversation for 5 months. And Trump's sheer durability in the polls is really a wake-up call to folks. Some of those anecdotes I read recently where a wealthy donor to maybe Bush or somebody else said, sure, I support Bush, but my gardener, my nannies, my chauffeur, all these other people are supporting Trump. And there's something to that. We can't do anything about the other players right now until we've got our own message out. And one thing that we're going to do is, I recognize that Donald Trump, like Hillary Clinton, probably has 110% name ID among voters. We really don't in Cruz world. Senator Cruz, a lot of the voters have information underload about Senator Cruz. They don't know his family's American dream story that rivals that of the Rubio family. They don't know his major impact on American jurisprudence when he argued successfully in front of the Supreme Court so many times, and the impact that that has had on our constitutional rights. What did Ted Cruz do before he went to the United States Senate in his 40s? He's not a political lifer, so we want to do some of that backfill.
So let me just ask you about Rubio now. For a lot of, again, I believe you've said you could imagine a world where it was Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio as
in that order
as the finalists, right? So it seems like you're going not you, but the Cruz campaign, Ted Cruz himself, going after, spending a lot of time on Marco Rubio right now, attacking him on immigration. Rubio spending a lot of time attacking Cruz on surveillance. That battle starting a little earlier than I think some people thought. Just give me your theory of the case with Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio.
Sure. The theory of the case first is that the Republicans are going to benefit from this transformational generational change that has always catapulted the Democrats. The Democratic Party has been masterful at elevating and indeed electing these young guys without a ton of experience. JFK, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, even Jimmy Carter was 52 with a 9-year-old daughter when he got to the White House. And we end up nominating Romney, McCain, Dole, wonderful Americans. I value their public service, but that's not the model we're going for this time. And you see that's not working this time. So these guys in their mid-40s with just a little bit of experience in Washington, they represent the generational transformational change. They also represent the future of the party, given that they're both Hispanic. Here's the other thing that's happening. The theory of the case is we believe in the super PAC world that there are certain deal breakers to the voters that they may just not be able to get past. And for Senator Rubio, that is clearly the fact that he dropped his bags down when he got to the United States Senate, crossed the hallway, and started doing deals with Chuck Schumer. There is a trending term, Shubio. Senator Schumer himself last week gave a great interview to the New York Times wherein he said, the facts are the facts. Senator Rubio fought really hard for the amnesty legislation, and Senator Cruz is always against it.
Let me get Mark in real quick right now for one last one.
We're between reporting periods, so do us a favor and tell us how much money are the Cruz super PACs collectively sitting on now in the bank?
I would never say that. We have ample resources, but not unlimited resources. And at Keep the Promise One, I plan to spend every penny of it helping Senator Cruz get the nomination.
Is it more than $60 million?
No comment.
I had to try.
Ample, but not unlimited. I'm going to use that line in other contexts as we move forward. Kellyanne Conway, you're great to be here. Thank you for doing it. We'll have you back soon. Coming up next, why you should not be surprised, even though you might be, by what President Obama has been saying about ISIS since the Paris attacks. After this word from our sponsors.
This crusade, this war on terrorism, is going to take a while.
States like these and their terrorist allies constitute an axis of evil. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists.
That was, of course, President George W. Bush talking tough about taking on terrorism. Here to talk to us about how President Obama's rhetoric on ISIS has differed in some ways is our White House correspondent and colleague Margaret Taleb, joining us from the Washington Bureau. Margaret.
Hey, Mark.
We are surprised. We talked to a lot of people who are surprised. Explain what you think President Obama and John Kerry are trying to execute in the rhetoric they've used since Paris.
Ooh, I mean, President Obama is obviously not trying to completely undo everything that he said for the last 7 years when he talks about his approach to terror and foreign policy. He's, for 7 years gone out of his way not to set this up as a contest of you're either with us or you're with the terrorists, not to say that there are axes of, evil. But in recent weeks and days, certainly, he's really been under pressure to show that he's not just sort of completely underestimating the threat or not taking it seriously enough or not doing enough. And so you hear him say things like ISIS is evil, but not that ISIS is part of some evil conspiracy, and you hear him saying things much more akin to nothing to fear but fear itself than you do things like we got to throw, everything at it right now. I think he's been seeking for years and continuing now to avoid the sort of frenzy that could precede a rush to war, to avoid another major commitment of U.S. ground troops. But when you see Brussels shut down for 3 or 4 days and Francois Hollande coming to the United States to try to, sort of show the world that the effort's being taken seriously, President Obama understands there's an imperative to do something a little bit different, but he's having some trouble figuring out exactly how much different he can go.
Margaret, for the president's critics, the notion is, look, he's really badly out of touch with where the American people and a lot of Western Europe are right now in terms of their level of anxiety. Is there any sense of that you get from inside the White House that they are going to need, now that he's back in the U.S., they're going to need to recalibrate to some extent, maybe give a speech to the nation, talk to people? Obviously, there's a lot of fear-mongering around, but beneath that, there's a lot of genuine and reasonable anxiety about where we stand right now.
That's right. That's right, and I think they didn't completely understand how the Syrian refugee program would be perceived here, and this has been sort of an education for the White House in terms of the intensity of fear and the fact that it sort of slipped across partisan lines, that Democrats are very worried about it also, as are independents. You are beginning to see a little bit of a recalibration, but again, it's not substance so much as it is rhetoric, and emphasizing on things like blogs and Twitter and social media. He can tease ISIS about being good with social terrorists who are good with social media all he wants, but the Obama administration itself has sought to be pioneers of using social media, and you're now beginning to see more on Twitter and more on the White House postings an effort to say, look what we're doing to fight ISIS. Watch this video of Josh Earnest saying something from a podium, or here's what President Obama said. Lisa Monaco, the head of counterterror, blogging on everything the administration is doing on ISIS. But, fundamentally, what it still boils down to, unless there's an about face in policy, is President Obama is resistant to committing ground troops, resistant to no-fly zones, and thinks that the idea of sending 10,000 troops in is not going to solve anything, and he's been very aggressive about pushing back on it. So how do you resist all these things, and how do you say, as he essentially has several times in the last week, I'm going to stay the course, without looking like you're dense and you're not hearing everybody's fears and frustrations? And that's been very difficult to calibrate. It's like he has to acknowledge what people are afraid of without promising more, because he's just finished saying that he's not willing to do more.
Margaret, have you picked up from anyone from inside the administration echoing what we've heard from Capitol Hill and from outside advisors to the White House, that while the president wants to be consistent and while he doesn't want tens of thousands of American troops, that his tone and even his willingness to engage with new ideas is not match the mood of the country and the world in the wake of Paris?
Yeah, that you are seeing some of that, but I do think you see a subtle recognition by the White House of this. When the French president comes tomorrow to visit, there originally was not going to be a news conference. Now there will be a news conference. There's a recognition that they need to have the president out there talking and sort of almost daily reshaping the language a little bit, recognizing people's concerns about this issue, and a recognition that that if he doesn't acknowledge that in his public remarks, he's just going to get hammered for it. And when you're the leader of the free world or the leader of any country, there's always this balancing act between doing what you think is right, but representing the people that you represent also. And in this case, the people have really, American people across partisan aisles have really been pushing the White House to understand that if he really is doing enough to counter ISIS, he needs to be explaining it in a different way.
Margaret, I want to play a little sound for you from the press conference the president gave in Turkey last week. A lot of people seized on various things that he said there and criticized him. There was another part of this press conference, a couple of answers he gave, that I think did not get quite the attention that they maybe deserved and were a little bit in a very different kind of mode. So let me play that for you real quick and get your reaction.
The Muslim community has to think about how we make sure that children are not being infected with this twisted notion that somehow they can kill innocent people, and that is justified by religion. And to some degree, that is something that has to come from within the Muslim community itself. And I think there have been times where there has not been enough pushback against extremism. There's been pushback. There's some who say, well, we don't believe in violence, but are not as willing to challenge some of the extremist thoughts or rationales for why Muslims feel oppressed. And I think those ideas have to be challenged.
Margaret, that's not the first time we've heard the president say such things, talking relatively tough toward the Muslim world. He did that at the UN last year. Is the White House and the president, are they frustrated with the fact that those kind of comments, when he makes them, don't get more kind of attention, especially from conservatives who would putatively like to hear that kind of message coming from him?
Yeah, I think, the conservative frustration with President Obama has much more to do with his disinterest in engaging more militarily than it does to whether he's having tough talk with Muslim Americans about what they can do as part of a U.S. strategy. But I do think that President Obama's approach is informed sort of biographically by two things on that front. One is his experience growing up for some period of time in Indonesia, and the other is the ways in which he's talked about growing up African American in the United States and sort of these cultural interfaces. So I think this is really heartfelt on his actually part. I don't think it's strategic so much as his opinion.
Thank you, Margaret. It's going to be a fascinating day at the White House tomorrow. We'll look forward to seeing what happens at that press conference. Thank you. Up next, a Donald Trump fact check unlike you've ever seen before, sort of. We'll be back in 60 seconds.
Over the past few months, Americans have become students of trying to decipher the connections between Donald Trump's mind and his mouth. Among the idiosyncrasies is one that involves former U.S. Army General Ray Odierno. Turns out Trump doesn't quite know how to say that last name. That doesn't stop him from saying it again and again and again and again.
General Odierno is most worried about the deep cuts to the Army.
I watched a general the other day on television who's just retiring. There was a general, I won't use his name, but he's leaving. Just the other day, General Odierno said that when General Odierno left, I was watching him 3 or 4 weeks ago on television. General Odierno the other day when he's leaving. I watched the other day, General Odierno, he's leaving. When General Odierno left, a couple of weeks ago, I saw him. He's leaving. General Odierno.
General Odierno.
Odierno. The other day, I saw him on television. He said, we're the worst prepared that we've ever been as a nation, our military.
Okay, Donald Trump, that's O-D-Air-No. Repeat after me, and we'll be right back. Mark, I woke up this morning and realized that we only have a 3-day work week this week, which, of course, is a delight for me and a delight for you. A little bit more tough for the politicians, though, and the people who work for them. What's the challenge involved in trying to get your political message out and the stuff that these campaigns are trying to get done in just a few days before people head off for the holidays?
Well, Congress is away, but the president is having a big press conference tomorrow with the president of France, so the ISIS matter will be front and center. For the presidential candidates, this is what they're going to have to get used to. For the balance of this year, which takes us into next year and then Iowa, they're going to have to deal with holidays. They're going to have to deal with getting their message out even while people are celebrating holidays. So this is the first test run of this. It's going to be an interesting one.
Right. The big change, of course, this time is that the last couple cycles we've gotten used to the Iowa caucuses coming right after New Year's. This year, this cycle, I should say, we have that full month of January. I think things are going to go in a little bit of a deep freeze here in December. But, boy, January is going to be a crazy, crazy month as we head towards those first votes.
Yeah. All right. We're live all the time on our website, BloombergPolitics.com.
We are on the tube.
Where you can visit. Make sure you check out our campaign tracker. It's got all the latest information on the 2016 race.
On tomorrow's show, our data guru, Sasha Eisenberg, will join us to talk about his forthcoming story about a new kind of weird voter profiling technique being used in New Hampshire. I cannot wait to see Sasha and that story and have Mark back here in New York City, which make me really happy on a lot of levels. Until then, I say, for me and for Mark, sayonara.